The snow started on Christmas Eve. At first, it was beautiful. Gentle flakes drifting down, dusting the pine trees outside my cabin. I was so excited. A white Christmas, just like in the movies. I had my logs stacked by the fireplace, a pantry full of food, and a stack of books I'd been meaning to read. It was supposed to be the perfect, quiet holiday retreat. Alone, but not lonely. Just me, the crackling fire, and the peaceful, silent world outside. By nightfall, the gentle flakes had turned into a thick, swirling blizzard. The wind howled like a hungry animal, rattling the windows of my little cabin. The world outside disappeared, replaced by a solid wall of white. It was no longer peaceful. It was isolating. The power flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging me into a thick, heavy darkness, broken only by the orange glow of the fire. That's when I first felt it. A deep, unsettling feeling of being watched. I told myself it was just the storm, the isolation playing tricks on my mind. I peered out the window, but all I could see was my own reflection in the dark glass, with the swirling snow behind it. It was impossible to see anything out there. Still, the feeling lingered, a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I tried to distract myself. I stoked the fire, made some hot chocolate on the wood stove, and wrapped myself in my thickest blanket. But the sound of the wind was relentless, and with every gust, I imagined shapes moving in the white out. Figures just at the edge of my vision, swallowed by the storm as soon as I tried to focus on them. Was it just the trees, swaying in the wind? Or was it something else? I must have dozed off in my armchair, because I was jolted awake by a sound that didn't belong to the storm. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from the front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. Who could possibly be out there? In this storm? No one knew I was here. My car was buried under feet of snow. The nearest town was miles away, and the roads would be impassable. It had to be the wind. A loose branch, maybe, hitting the door. I waited, holding my breath. Silence. Then again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. It was deliberate. Someone was at my door. I crept towards it, my bare feet cold on the wooden floor. The fire cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach for me. Through the peephole, all I saw was a swirling vortex of white. The snow was coming down so hard, it was like looking into a void. I shouted, my voice trembling, "Who's there?" The only answer was the howling wind. But the knocking came again, this time more insistent, more desperate. It was followed by a faint, muffled cry. It sounded like a child. My logical mind screamed at me, "Don't open the door. It's a trick. It's the storm." But another part of me, the human part, couldn't ignore the sound of a child in distress. What if someone's car had broken down? What if they were freezing to death just feet from my door? I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing. My hand shook as I reached for the deadbolt. With a heavy click, I unlocked it. I pulled the heavy wooden door open just a crack, bracing myself against the wind. A blast of icy air and snow rushed in, extinguishing a few candles and making the fire roar. I squinted into the blizzard, shouting again, "Hello? Is anyone there?" There was nothing, no person, no footprints, though the snow was piling up so fast they would have been covered in seconds. There was only the storm, a relentless roaring chaos. Confused and a little scared, I quickly shut the door, ramming the deadbolt home. The sound of the lock clicking into place was strangely comforting. I leaned against the door, my heart still pounding. What was that? Was I going crazy? Was the isolation finally getting to me? I went back to the fire, trying to rationalize it. The wind can make strange sounds. It can sound like voices, like knocking. That's when I noticed something. The rocking chair by the fireplace, the one I hadn't been sitting in, was gently swaying back and forth. as if someone had just gotten up from it. My blood ran cold. I hadn't touched that chair. It was on the other side of the room. I scanned the cabin, my eyes darting into every dark corner. The shadows seemed deeper now, more menacing, and I saw it, on the floor, leading from the front door towards the fireplace. A trail of small, wet footprints. They weren't from my bare feet. These were the prints of little boots, melting into the wooden floorboards. Small, like a child's, and they were leading away from the door into the heart of my cabin. I stood frozen, unable to scream. My gaze followed the trail of wet prints. They ended right beside the rocking chair, the chair that was still, ever so slightly, moving. A soft giggle echoed through the room, so quiet it was almost lost in the sound of the storm outside. It was a child's laugh, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was cold and empty. A chill, far colder than the winter air, crept up my spine and settled deep in my bones. I slowly backed away, my eyes locked on the empty chair. I had been so worried about the knocking at my door, so afraid of what was trying to get in from the storm. The thought was so terrifying, so absolute, it stole the air from my lungs. The knocking wasn't to be let in. It was a warning. It was trying to tell me that something was already inside with me, trapped, and now so was I. The first sign that something was wrong was the silence. The usual Christmas Eve hum of the old house, the gentle creak of wood settling, the whisper of wind against the windows. It was all gone. A thick, heavy quiet had fallen, the kind that feels like a blanket smothering all sound. I was 8 years old, tucked into my bed, my ears straining for the telltale jingle of sleigh bells. I'd been a good boy all year. I was sure of it. My letter to Santa was practically a novel of my good deeds. Lying there, I stared at the faint glow of the street lamp filtering through my curtains. That's when I heard it. Not bells, not a cheerful ho, ho, ho. It was a slow, deliberate thud on the roof. One after another. Thud. Pause. Thud. It sounded too heavy for a reindeer, too rhythmic for falling snow. It was the sound of heavy boots, boots worn by someone large, pacing back and forth right above my head. My heart started to beat a little faster. Maybe it was just my dad checking the decorations. But why would he be on the roof at midnight? Then another sound drifted down, a low, rumbling groan from the chimney. It wasn't the sound of someone sliding down. It was the sound of something being dragged, scraped against the bricks. I pulled the covers up to my chin, my eyes wide in the dark. The fireplace in the living room downstairs was purely decorative. My parents had sealed it years ago. No one could get down that chimney. It was impossible. A long, dark shadow began to stretch from the fireplace across the living room floor, visible through the crack under my bedroom door. It was impossibly long and thin, like a spider's leg unfurling. It twisted and danced in the faint light, a dark stain on the festive carpet. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't Santa. Santa's shadow was supposed to be round and jolly. This was wrong. And then the voice came. It was a whisper, but it filled the entire house, seeming to come from the walls themselves. Ho! 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 It wasn't cheerful. It was a guttural, drawn-out rasp, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Each ho was a low growl, distorted and menacing. It was a mockery of the sound I'd longed to hear. The air grew cold, a biting, unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the winter night outside. I could see my own breath misting in front of my face. I wanted to scream for my mom and dad, but the sound was trapped in my throat, choked by a fear so pure it felt like ice in my veins. The heavy footsteps were no longer on the roof. They were downstairs now, a slow, dragging shuffle on the hardwood floor. Drag, step, drag, step, like one foot was lame or weighed down by something immense. I could hear the floorboards groaning under an incredible weight. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to be a dream. Please, let me wake up. Let it be Christmas morning with presents and pancakes. But the sounds were too real. A soft tearing sound reached my ears. Rip, the sound of fabric. I pictured the stockings hung by the chimney, my family's names carefully embroidered on them. Was he tearing them down? A sudden, loud crash from the kitchen made me jump, a yelp escaping my lips. It sounded like the entire cookie jar, the one I'd filled with gingerbread men for Santa, had been smashed against the wall. Then a sickening crunch, followed by a wet, slurping noise. He wasn't eating the cookies. He was enjoying them in some other horrible way. The sweet smell of ginger and cinnamon was replaced by something else. A coppery metallic scent that tickled my nose. It smelled like an old penny. It smelled like blood. I couldn't stay in my bed any longer. I had to see. I had to know. Terror roared with a morbid curiosity I couldn't control. Slowly, silently, I slid out from under the covers. The floor was freezing against my bare feet. I crept to my door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. I turned it with agonizing slowness, wincing at the tiny click it made. I peeked through the crack. The living room was bathed in a strange, pulsating red light coming from the fireplace. It wasn't a fire. It was something else, something alive. And there he was. His back was to me. He was huge, far bigger than any man I'd ever seen. His form filled the doorway to the kitchen. He was wearing the red suit, but it was tattered and stained with something black that looked like soot and something else that was dark and wet. A piece of the familiar red fabric was torn near the shoulder, hanging loose. He was stooped over, his massive shoulders shaking with silent, guttural laughter. The slurping sound was louder now. He was hunched over the kitchen counter, where a plate of cookies and glass of milk had been. But he wasn't eating them. He had one of my mom's porcelain Christmas angels in his massive, grimy hand. He brought it to his mouth, and with a sickening crack that echoed the sound of the cookie jar, he bit its head off. He chewed slowly, deliberately, the porcelain grinding between his teeth. The metallic smell was stronger now. I realized it was coming from the sack at his feet. It wasn't a sack full of toys. It was a lumpy, misshapen thing, and dark liquid was seeping from the bottom, creating a dark puddle on the floor. It was the source of the coppery smell. It wasn't a sack for giving. It was a sack for taking. He finally turned, as if he sensed my presence, and I saw his face. It wasn't the jolly, rosy-cheeked face from the storybooks. His skin was pale and waxy, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. His beard wasn't white and fluffy, but yellowed and matted, tangled with bits of what looked like straw and something else, something dark and stringy. His eyes were just black pits, empty sockets that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. And his smile, it stretched from ear to ear, a ghastly predatory grin filled not with teeth, but with rows of sharpened, needle-like points, like a shark. A low growl rumbled in his chest, and he took a step towards me. The dragging sound was from the heavy iron chain shackled to his ankle, which he pulled behind him across the floor. He raised a long, bony finger and pointed it directly at me. The raspy voice echoed in my head, no longer a whisper. "You've been a very, very good boy," he hissed, the words slithering through his needle-like teeth. "So good. I've come to collect you." His smile widened, and he began to shuffle forward, dragging his chain, the sack sloshing with its terrible contents. I was frozen. A silent scream locked in my chest. He wasn't here to bring me presents. He was here for me. I was the present. And this Christmas, I was going to be taken away in his sack, just like all the other good little boys and girls. Ever since I was a kid, the line, "He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake," always felt a little dot off. It was meant to be a fun little threat to keep kids from misbehaving, right? But as I got older, that feeling never really went away. It just burrowed deeper, turning from a childhood unease into a full-blown adult paranoia. This year, it got worse. A lot worse. It started subtly, just after Halloween. I was sitting in my living room, the late autumn chill creeping through the window frames. I was just scrolling through my phone when I noticed it, a flicker of movement in the old, unused fireplace. I looked up, and my heart just stopped. For a split second, I saw two faint, glowing points of light deep within the soot-stained bricks. They were like tiny embers, but they didn't flicker with warmth. They were cold, steady, and focused directly on me. I blinked, and they were gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, my mind playing games on a dark evening. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A few days later, I started decorating for Christmas, hoping the festive cheer would chase away the growing dread. I pulled out the boxes of old ornaments from the attic, the familiar scent of pine and dust filling the air. As I was hanging a shiny red bauble on the tree, I noticed something odd. Its surface wasn't just reflecting the room back at me. Deep inside the glass, there was a tiny, dark circle, almost like a camera lens. I held it closer, turning it over in my hand. It was perfect, almost too perfect. I checked another one, a silver bell. Same thing. A tiny black dot, perfectly centered, staring out. I went through the whole box. Every single reflective ornament had one. I'd had these decorations for years, passed down from my parents. Had they always been there? Or was this something new? I felt a cold sweat on my neck. I put them all back in the box and shoved it into the back of the closet. The bare tree stood in my living room like a skeletal warning. The nights became the worst part. I'd lie in bed, my eyes wide open in the dark, straining to hear anything over the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. I started hearing faint scratching sounds. They seemed to come from everywhere at once. The attic above, the walls around me, even from under the floorboards. It sounded like a pen, scratching furiously against paper. Scratch, scratch, scratch. A rhythmic, relentless sound that would go on for hours. It was the sound of a list being written, an impossibly long list. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I crept out of my bedroom and into my home office. I had left a blank notepad and a pen on my desk earlier that day. Now, in the pale glow of the moonlight filtering through the window, the notepad was no longer blank. It was covered, line by line, in an elegant, looping script I didn't recognize. My blood ran cold as I read the words. It was a detailed account of my entire day. 7:14 a.m. Woke up, snoozed alarm twice. 7:32 a.m. Spilled coffee on the kitchen counter. 11:47 a.m. Thought about calling in sick to work, but decided against it. 3:22 p.m. Looked at a picture of an old friend and felt sad. It went on, listing not just my actions, but my thoughts, my fleeting emotions, my private moments of doubt and regret. Every secret I held was laid bare on the page. At the bottom of the last page, in bold, red ink, was a single word: naughty. Panic took over. I tore the pages from the notepad, ripped them into tiny pieces, and threw them into the fireplace. The same fireplace where I'd seen the eyes. I had to get out. I ran to the front door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. As I pulled the door open, I froze. Standing on my porch, silent and unmoving in the falling snow, was a man. He was huge, larger than any person I'd ever seen, and bundled in a thick red coat trimmed with what looked like grimy, matted white fur. A long, tangled white beard covered most of his face, but I could see his eyes. They weren't jolly or kind. They were the same cold, glowing points of light I had seen in my fireplace. He didn't say a word. He just held up a hand, and in his gloved palm was a small, beautifully wrapped gift box with a tag. My name was written on it in that same elegant, looping script. He wasn't smiling. His expression was utterly blank, his presence a crushing weight of judgment. This wasn't the sounder from stories and songs. This was something ancient, something that didn't care about joy or gifts. This was a warden, a record keeper of every misstep, every dark thought, every single failing. He stepped forward, and I stumbled back into my house, slamming the door shut. I locked it, my back pressed against the wood, listening. There was no sound of him leaving. There was only the faint, rhythmic scratching sound, starting up again, this time seeming to come from just outside the door. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I realized then that the song was all wrong. He doesn't just know if you've been bad or good. He knows everything. He sees everything. The naughty or nice list isn't about getting presents or a lump of coal. It never was. That's just the story we tell the children. The truth is so much more terrifying. It's a census, a tally. He's not making a list and checking it twice to decide who gets a toy. He's making a list for the harvest. The chimney isn't just a weigh-in. It's a collection point. The scratching has stopped now, and I can hear the sound of soot and bricks scraping as something very large begins to descend my chimney. He knows I'm awake, and he's coming to town. The old house was always quiet, but on Christmas Eve, the silence felt different. It was heavy, thick, like a blanket smothering every sound. The only thing cutting through it was the soft, rhythmic blink of the Christmas tree lights, painting the walls in shifting colors of red, green, and gold. I'd spent all day decorating, trying to fill the empty rooms with some semblance of holiday cheer. The scent of pine and cinnamon hung in the air, a sweet perfume that couldn't quite mask the musty smell of old wood and dust. As dusk settled, casting long, eerie shadows across the living room, a strange feeling began to creep over me. It started as a prickle on the back of my neck, the kind of sensation you get when you feel eyes on you. I'd glance over my shoulder, but there was nothing. Just the grandfather clock in the hall, its pendulum swinging in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The house was empty. I was alone. I had to be. I tried to shake it off, blaming the isolation. I put on some Christmas carols, hoping the familiar, cheerful tunes would chase away the growing unease. Silent night filled the air, its gentle melody usually a comfort. But tonight, it sounded different, distorted. Underneath the singer's voice, I could almost hear something else. A faint whisper, a sibilant hiss that seemed to coil around the notes. I turned the music off. The silence that rushed back in was even worse. My eyes were drawn back to the tree. It was beautiful, laden with ornaments collected over a lifetime. Glistening silver balls, delicate glass angels, and shiny red baubles. As I stared, I noticed my reflection in one of the larger silver ornaments. It was warped, my face stretched and twisted into a grotesque parody. I watched, unnerved, as the reflection's eyes seemed to move on their own, darting around the room behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty armchair by the fireplace and the stockings hanging from the mantel, limp and lifeless. The feeling of being watched intensified. It felt like a physical pressure, a weight pressing down on my chest. Every creak of the floorboards above, every rustle of the wind against the window panes, sounded like footsteps. I started to patrol the house, checking locks, peering out of windows into the snowy, dark yard. The world outside was still, blanketed in white. No footprints marred the fresh snow. No one was out there. Back in the living room, the blinking lights of the trees seemed to mock my fear. Blink, red, blink, green. The shadows they cast danced and writhed on the walls, creating monstrous shapes that flickered in and out of existence. I tried to focus on the warmth of the fireplace, the crackle of the logs. But even that sound seemed to hide another, a soft, dry rustle, like paper or dry leaves skittering across pavement. I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision. A flicker in the hallway mirror. A shadow shifting in the corner of the room. When I turned to look directly, it was always gone. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. Am I going crazy? Is this what solitude does to you? I decided to make some hot chocolate, a simple, comforting ritual. In the kitchen, the cold linoleum floor felt like ice against my socks. As I waited for the milk to heat, I stared at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. Behind my own tired, scared face, I could see the reflection of the living room, the tree, the fireplace, and something else. A tall, slender figure standing just behind the armchair. It was little more than a silhouette, a darker patch of black against the shadows, but it was unmistakably there. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to confront it, but my body was paralyzed with a terror so profound it felt like I was encased in ice. I couldn't move. I could only stare at the reflection in the window. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to take a slow, shaky breath. It's a trick of the light, I told myself. A shadow cast by the tree. It has to be. I squeezed my eyes shut, counted to 3, and opened them again. The reflection was empty. The figure was gone. The milk on the stove began to boil over, hissing as it hit the hot surface. The sudden noise broke the spell, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I abandoned the hot chocolate, my thirst for comfort replaced by a desperate need to prove my sanity. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely unlock it. I opened the camera and aimed it at the living room, using the screen as a buffer between me and whatever might be there. I panned the phone slowly across the room. The armchair, the fireplace, the tree, nothing. Relief, potent and dizzying, washed over me. It was all in my head. The stress, the loneliness, the old, creaky house. It was all just my imagination running wild. I let out a shaky laugh. Christmas Eve nerves, that's all. Feeling a bit more foolish than scared, I decided to go to bed. I walked through the living room, deliberately not looking too closely into the shadowy corners. I switched off the tree lights, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the faint glow of the dying embers in the fireplace. The sudden change from blinking lights to steady darkness was a relief. Upstairs, my bedroom was cold. I pulled the heavy curtains shut, blocking out the sight of the dark, snowy night. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. The house was silent again, but this time, the silence felt peaceful. The whispers were gone. The feeling of being watched had vanished. My paranoia, it seemed, had finally exhausted itself. I was safe. I was alone. I closed my eyes, ready for sleep to take me. And then I heard it. Not a creak, not a whisper, not a rustle. It was a voice, clear as day, right next to my ear. It was a soft, gentle voice, and it said just one thing. Did you really think you were ever alone? My eyes snapped open. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The terror was absolute, a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. I lay perfectly still, my own breathing roaring in my ears. I knew, with a certainty that was colder than the winter air outside, that I was not alone in the room. Slowly, ever so slowly, I turned my head on the pillow. In the faint moonlight, filtering through a gap in the curtains, I saw it. A face. It was hanging in the air just inches from mine, upside down. The eyes were wide, dark pits. The mouth was stretched into a wide, silent grin. And the most terrifying part? The face was familiar. It was the face from the Christmas ornament. The stretched, distorted reflection. My reflection. But it wasn't a reflection anymore. It was real. And it was here, with me. The grin widened, and I finally understood. The house wasn't haunted. I was. The thing that was watching me, that was whispering to me, it wasn't in the house. It was inside me. And it had finally decided to come out and play. Merry Christmas.